Can musicians and DIY culture teach creators, TikTokers, YouTubers, anything about how to make lo-fi, interesting human content? And can TikTokers and creators teach musicians a different way of thinking about approaching the internet, approaching culture, approaching fandom, parasocial relationships, building crowds? Those are the themes in today's episode, where I meet pretty much my favourite TikToker. He makes these brilliant VH1 style kind of like history of music, podcasty type, video-y type things that are reasonably long. They're not too long. They're TikTok length. They're not like quick fire TikToks. He picks up an old telephone, talks through an old VHS TV, and it's just brilliant. Like, he's done videos about The Cure, he's done videos about Nirvana, he's done videos about Phoenix, the Arctic Monkeys. It's a brilliant way of mapping the past and glancing into the future, looking at the lessons we can learn about lore and world building and just the magic of being a fan. Royce, ShoshinBoy as he's known on TikTok, is really passionate, really smart, really thoughtful, really interesting, and this was a great conversation. It happened a little while ago. Don't think anything in here is particularly out of date. We've edited out a couple of bits that were, and I will catch you at the end. This is the Drown in Sound podcast, mapping the future of music. What would you, in your mind, describe as journalism?
I find it really interesting that when you reached out to me, because I've never considered what I do journalism until you reached out to me, which I find kind of interesting. I don't know, to me, journalism has always felt like more interviews, like more like being in the trenches, you know, getting those primary sources, doing the interviews, reviewing gigs and all that. I feel like I'm just telling stories in a way, but when you mentioned it, I like almost like reassessed what I'm doing on TikTok in a different context, and like I wouldn't argue it. How do you view it?
Because there's a level of research that goes into what you do, and it's storytelling, and you're building something for an audience. I think it's a form of journalism, and actually I think a lot of what people consider to be journalism is often just kind of promotion and puff pieces, or it's like criticism but without any real journalism to it. It's like it's music criticism. And I think what I really like about your videos is you bring music appreciation into a kind of everyday, like something pops up in your phone and you consider something you haven't thought about before. And I think that to me is what some of my favorite critics and music writers can do. And I think it's really interesting that it seems from some of the things that you've posted about that you've kind of grown up with music writing, and that some of that is kind of gone in, like in a weird way, like you're kind of doing what VH1 might be doing now if it was around.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense that's how it's being perceived, because like to me, like the whole impetus of it was just essentially, you know, playing that game when you're hanging out with friends and just like sharing videos, like, oh, have you seen this, or have you seen that? And that's kind of the angle that I've been taking, where it's coming from an appreciation. It's coming from like the conversations I have with friends are basically almost exactly what ends up in the TikToks in a certain way. But I think just like who I am and like that background that you alluded to in terms of just like being like such a voracious reader of like blogs growing up and just like going down, you know, forum deep dives or like YouTube deep dives as a kid, like that's just kind of who I am.
So let's introduce you to the audience a little bit. So I'm trying to guess even how old you are, because some of your cultural references, have a feeling you're probably in about your 20s.
Yeah, that's all right.
Early 20s.
I won't say. I try not to say, not out of vanity. I find it very amusing that no one knows how old I am, and it's something that I kind of realized early on, and it's been kind of a running joke, because I've gotten everywhere from like 17 to like 37.
And so how did you kind of get into music, and at what point? So I think there's probably two questions here to kind of just join the dots between you sort of alluded to the fact that you've been a big music fan from quite a young age. Like, what was your kind of journey to how you've got now to kind of putting videos out? What was the moment made you think, I should probably start posting on TikTok?
I mean, I've talked about this on the TikTok, but I guess like there is like a moment I feel like I could point to where it's like, this is me thinking about music in a different way, instead of just kind of taking what's being presented to you, whatever your parents are listening to, or what's on the radio. And that was the Everett True Nirvana biography that I think my dad got for me and my brother, because like we had seen like the making of Nevermind like documentary with Butch Vig, got really into that, and he got us. It's this like 500-page tome, and I read that thing back to forward probably 3 or 4 times, like in class, ignoring the teacher, just reading that. And I would go and like anytime a band was mentioned, I'd immediately go Google it and look them up. So like that's like the web of like, some of it I liked, some of it I didn't like, some of it maybe I like learned to like later in life, but that just being this like entry point into essentially like alternative music, like punk music, maybe like more.
I remember reading that Everett True book too, and I was probably aware of a lot of the music in there, but not heard a lot of it. And I ended up going off and like listening to the Raincoats and finding like different ways into music that I wasn't very familiar with. But I think Everett's got that amazing skill of just like sharing his passion and it feeling quite infectious. And there was definitely something when he started Careless Talk Cost Life magazine. I don't know if you've come across that magazine that he was the editor of. He made that magazine with Steve Gullock, who did a lot of the iconic Nirvana shots as well. And I think they just like bring a whole world to life, which is really amazing. You've told me a little bit about that kind of really turning you on. And did you kind of get into reading blogs and magazines off the back of that?
Weirdly enough, this might be a generational thing. A lot of it was just, and I think it reflects in kind of what I'm doing on the TikTok. It was just YouTube, right? Finding live videos and just reading the comments and seeing like what people mentioned there, and just like, following the link rabbit hole to like whatever illogical conclusion it brings you to, that was a lot of it. It was really interesting reading that Everett True biography, and kind of, I'm super intrigued in like your thoughts on it, because I think by the time I got my hands on that, like Melody Maker as it was dead. A lot of the magazines were dead, and so it was like all the blogs.
What was the moment when you kind of realized that you could start taking some of the things you were finding and sharing your passion and knowledge for it on TikTok?
Like you could go and you could find like the video where I figured out that I could hook up my VHS camera to the TV and then talk into the phone.
Yeah, I scrolled back and saw it. It was such a cool moment to see you going, does this work? And then do I do this?
It's like the whole idea, it's so funny that it's kind of like gotten out of hand, in that it started off like, my whole channel started off like as a joke in a way, in that like I feel like on TikTok and like talking about like the future of like music criticism or journalism and just media, I was watching, all these TikToks, got like downloaded it during the pandemic, and we got, all addicted to it. And you start realizing that in order to draw an audience, like people had these like little gimmicks, or these little ways you need to capture someone's attention in like the first 2 seconds, right? And like sometimes like someone will have a good gimmick, and like you'll pick up what they're putting down. And like sometimes it's very transparent, and like the only thing there is the gimmick, and there's nothing really like propping it up. So like the whole talking into a phone and a TV was kind of like a joke on like, what is the most absurd thing you could do to grab someone's attention that is just on its face. Like
how analog can I be whilst playing YouTube clips?
Right, exactly. Like it's old fashioned. It's like weird. It takes so much effort to like hook up. Like there are so many wires and cords in this room to hook everything up. And like it's like a little funny joke to myself. But then I think I posted a video about Pavement playing on Conan. Because like I made that video where I was like, this is a funny gimmick, huh? And like people were like, yeah, that's kind of funny. And then I was like, yeah, what if I like do the gimmick but try to actually make something? And I just talked about Pavement playing on Conan. And it was like literally the most pure sense of like, these are comments I made when showing this video to friends. Like these are little jokes or little observations that we had. And I did that in like, it got like 70,000 views like overnight.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, there might be something, like, you know, there's the dopamine release of getting likes and stuff like that. Or I was like, well, I guess I got to do another one, and then another one, and then I think like within a week I did one on Nirvana at the VMAs, and that got like 2 million views.
Wow.
Which was, I mean, it was stressful because it was like.
And your videos before that were doing like a few hundred views, weren't they?
Yeah, like nothing. It was just like me. Like I have DIY projects. I like build guitars and stuff like that. To no one, just like my friends. And then within a week, it's like 2 million people are looking at your face, talking out of an old TV, and it's overwhelming, you know?
Yeah. And with those first few videos, were you scripting them, or were you just literally hitting record and just saying what you were thinking?
Oh, it was just like talking into a camera for 20 minutes, and then I would edit it down, which to a certain extent is still what I do. Like I don't actually script the videos.
Yeah.
Like I have a notebook where I like write down bullet points, and yeah, I do like, you know, probably like watching like YouTube vloggers growing up. There's like a lot of jump cuts in my videos and stuff like that, which I find kind of funny because it's like a jump cut feels very like 2011. And TikTok is obviously very 2023, and the TV and everything is very like late 90s. It's like such a mishmash of technology. Yeah. I try to just like approach it like a conversation that I'd have with my friends, you know, and like I'll info dump on my friends. Like I love sharing this, and I love just like connecting with people. And
how, when you spot something, do you know you want to make a video about it? Like, have you already got like a long list of things you want to make videos about, or is there, you're just diving down a rabbit hole and you realize, this clip of The Cure like playing before Robert Palmer feels like something that is something that maybe you and your friends know about, but kind of wider culture. Like, for instance, I didn't know that Cure story. And the way you introduced it was if like it's like a big thing in like rock legend, and I was like, I'm a big Cure fan and I wasn't familiar with it. So how do you sort of spot your moments?
I mean, yeah, that's super funny because like, and like that kind of is like the frame of reference of like the internet and how in a lot of ways things are so compartmentalized, and there's like a subculture, a subculture, a subculture. Like that story has been something that I had been aware of since I was like 11 years old for whatever reason. I don't know how I came across it. And so like that like there will be video ideas like that where it's like in the back of my mind, like, oh, I at some point need to get to that. Like that was one that I had in my back pocket where it was just like, at some point I'm going to have to talk about, you know, the Cure, you know, fuck Robert Palmer, fuck rock and roll story. And then some will just like be spur of the moment. Like I'll find something and be like, it's like 2 a.m., but I got to do like 3-4 hours of research on this because it's occupied my brain to that extent.
Because I thought it was quite interesting. You did like back-to-back videos on Parliament samples, and I thought that was a really interesting to see whether maybe you started making a video and found something else. You're like, okay, that's a whole other video.
Oh, no, that's exactly how that went down, where it was like, I mean, that, and you probably could, or I could probably point, if I were to scroll through like the videos that I posted, like there is some connection from one to the next one, like in my brain, and it might be, you know, several layers of abstraction down, but like there is like a direct link where it's like this thing led me to thinking about that, which maybe led me to think about something completely different, which like led to the next video. And that's just like kind of how my brain works. Like I have like diagnosed ADHD, which is probably immediately apparent to anyone watching my TikToks or whatever. I feel like that kind of helps it feel a little like natural and like keeps it fun ultimately, because like the videos take like probably more work than is apparent. So like if it weren't fun and like it weren't like what I am like naturally compelled to do, I probably wouldn't be doing it. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's also going back to a lot of those artists that you would have been reading about in the Everett True book. Like, they're really lo-fi, but there was a lot of work went into doing those, like, bad tape recordings, and like Daniel Johnston recording 100 copies of the same tape and just performing it live each time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like it is like it's very casual. It's what I'm compelled to do, but I think it is something that I hadn't even thought of it until you just mentioned. It was probably instilled in me, and like that kind of like the DIY mentality or ethics. I got like really into punk in high school and college. In that, like at the end of the day, like if I'm making a video, it's because I have an opinion on something, or I have a perspective, or I have something I genuinely, want to share. I probably haven't or very rarely put out a video because like I'm desperate. Like I need views, or like, I think this is like what's going to get a bunch of hits. It's like, I usually am grounded in actually having something to say. And so like, that's where like all the thought goes into, is like, I do a ton of research that never ends up on screen, because if I don't do that research, then I don't have an actual perspective. I'm just reading a Wikipedia page, which is something I try to avoid. I try to bring something to it that's like myself.
Where did your research take you? Is it Reddit rabbit holes? Is it old reviews? Like what sort of things are you looking at?
I try to and like the most fun for me is to find primary sources from like contemporary sources from like whichever time I'm talking about. Like for that Cure video, I found like a lot. I found interviews from around that era. I was like finding, books written by the Cure, because that always tends to uncover like things like that I at least find really interesting, and like things that tend to like not be on a Wikipedia page, or like I guess like things that maybe aren't true because they're urban legends, and it's ultimately a game of telephone.
With a telephone.
Yeah, game of telephone with a telephone. And like that's why I find it so fun. It's like uncovering all these things, and like the internet both makes it super easy to find those sources and like very hard at times.
And that kind of sensation of bringing the mythology and kind of taking it up a notch, like that's kind of what being a music fan's all about, isn't it? It's finding those little kind of gems that makes people even more excited.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like it's like I think a lot about like why we even care about some of the things that I care about, and it is that it's like it's the idea of like folklore, mythology, or these like little connections, these little things that you notice that someone else noticed. Like it's just so fun, and the way it like can build community or like connect you with people. Like I'm like talking to you from like what 5,000 miles away.
Yeah,
like that's incredible. Like that is awesome. I love that. And so like I guess these things matter because we say they do.
Yeah, definitely. And did you ever consider like starting a fanzine or a blog, or did you do those kind of things? And like, is that something that you kind of felt compelled to do?
I think like those thoughts were definitely in my head, especially. I mean, like I hosted a college radio show for like one semester. I like toyed with like starting a label in college. Like everyone was like, I should start a podcast, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I just never really did it until TikTok. I don't know if it felt like that ship had sailed, but by the time like I was sentient enough and, capable and able enough to actually like strike out and try, which is just such an interesting thing, and like how media comes in cycles and these institutions come and go, because like I think when I was thinking about that, it's like, who's going to read my blog when there's, Stereogum, Pitchfork, Ground and Sound, like there's so many. It's like, why would people, and I still sometimes have this thought, like, why would anyone care what I have to say about it,
Well, I was lucky because there weren't blogs really when I started mine. Pitchfork existed, but I'd never heard of it. And So I think there's definitely a moment where it felt a bit pointless to start a blog, and we were quite lucky because it meant a lot of people came to us to write rather than start their own thing. But I think it was a particular moment in time. I think now that people can explore streaming on their own, some of the good things that social media can do. And I worked for Six Music, the BBC station, for about 4 years, running their social media channels. And I really liked that I could post about Jeff Buckley's Grace 1 minute, and it was an anniversary, and some people were commenting, I've never heard of this record before, and then go off on a journey and discover it. The next minute I might be posting about like a new release from Wet Leg or some new band that people haven't heard of before, and like that would spark an older generation to go off on a journey. And I think knowing that from people just scrolling they might just go off and find their new favorite record is quite a nice feeling sometimes.
I think it's really interesting because I listened to the podcast where you were talking about, the start of Drowned in Sound, and like the whole landscape is so different than it is now, and how there really wasn't anything, blogs weren't a thing. Like it wasn't an established medium, and how like you had to, design the web pages yourself. And I found that like super interesting because that was wild to me to hear, because it's like I've always existed in a world with music blogs. And I think in a way, though, that probably is why like what you were doing was able to connect with people, is because it was coming from like a very genuine place. Sometimes, like if we're going to talk like the future of music journalism, sometimes I'm a little skeptical now moving forward, because it seems like every new thing coming out, whenever someone's, starting a TikTok page or whatever, like it's always a step towards something bigger, I feel like I could see, maybe when I articulate myself well, like I feel like you see all the time in like, it's kind of like the whole thing with the joke about the gimmick on my page is that people see that like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and you almost see that in the intent and from the angle that sometimes it doesn't feel like it's coming from a genuine place, if that's making any sense.
And that makes perfect sense, because I think we're in what people call a creator economy, and it's like, well, it's an attention economy too. And the idea that you are either earning money or attention, or you're getting the attention to upsell to something else, like it just feels disingenuous, and it feels like people aren't creating for the platform, they're creating to extract wealth from the people viewing them on the platform. And I think absolutely. I think if we were in a world where TikTok paid you because you entertained a certain number of people on their platform, it would be a very different experience. Like even like Rumble, where all the alt-right are headed, like that platform doesn't pay people. It still monetizes by putting Google ads on their videos. And I think the economics of where we're at, like for instance, I can imagine if you posted a video saying, I'm running this show downtown in San Francisco, or a promoter booked you, instead of booking a DJ, they had you come on stage and do like in conversation with someone talking of like Matt Helders is in town, like you would sit down and chat to him about some of the video clips you've made. Like A, you'd love it, I imagine.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
B, that you'd bring some people in.
Is that an offer? Is that like, somebody?
Yeah. But I think that idea of like you've not started this channel to do anything other than just talk about the music you love, which I think that purity, and I think that probably comes from the culture that you've come from and the music that you've loved. Like I think that's something that's quite rare, and I think it's very easy to spot people that are doing things just for the music.
No, yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, because like I think that like at its core, I just want to be genuine, and like I said, I'm only doing this because it's fun and it's what I'm compelled to do anyways. It's such a weird landscape. It's such an interesting and somewhat bleak landscape. Like I do genuinely like people should be paid for their work. Like creators should be paid for their work. But there is this thing where it's like something I feel like is genuine and like a quality piece of media or piece of art is not necessarily something that is going to get latched onto by the algorithm. It's going to be rewarded with views in the intention economy. And I think that it's kind of depressing,
We see the same thing in music though, like the things that jump through aren't the most kind of challenging pieces of music, and they're not necessarily like, to think that all of the greatest songs of all time are sat on our phones and our computers right now, but you can only listen to what you can think of and remember. And that becomes even harder when you're just on a smart speaker. Like, trying to get people's brains to jolt towards things, like that's a huge challenge. And I think there's very little investment because the value of it is so hard to quantify. Like, and I think in a weird way, like sometimes the value of music is all over the place because it means everything, but if you don't like it, it means nothing. And I think that's something that's really hard. And it's the same with writing as well, isn't it? It's like, if someone writes something and you don't agree with it, or you see a video and you don't agree with it, it's worth nothing. But if someone shares an epiphany with you that's suddenly changed your whole view on the world, then that's kind of priceless.
There's this idea that I like talk about often, like with my friends or just in general, where it's just like, I don't think the idea of selling out exists in the year 2023. You know, acknowledging the idea that just to even pay rent or exist as a creative online in the current economy is it's so difficult that it's like, I don't know how I feel about that, you know, necessarily, because I am, like I said, of the opinion, like, people should be rewarded for the labor, and like if they're going to put in the labor and like make things that people care about, they should, you know, at least be able to pay rent, you know, at least be able to exist.
I keep thinking about this idea of like collectives and like record labels being a structure, like the meta label stuff is really interesting, which is Yancey from Kickstarter's new project. And a lot of what they're talking about is basically forming collectives and sharing in however much you share in the product that's created. And like some of what they've been doing is putting out magazines and things, and just the collective endeavor is not really about making money. It's just ensuring that one person isn't burdened with all the work or all the costs. And I've just been thinking a lot about, there was for a while these like creator hubs and houses and all that nonsense with YouTubers. And I just wonder what's the like low level kind of like sub pop version of that, where you sign a bunch of people to make stuff for the next like 3 years, and then you build an audience and then you monetize that audience. Like if Sub Pop would turn around to you, like I'm not suggesting that this isn't the kind of thing some labels are thinking about. And if 1 in 10 of your videos was talking about a classic Sub Pop record or a new release, like you'd be pretty stoked because you'd be being funded for your other 9 videos.
Right.
And you'd probably be just digging through the Sub Pop catalog of records you already like. So it'd be a really good overlap, and they wouldn't be choosing someone who didn't kind of sit in that nexus. But I just don't think that, like with Drown in Sound, we always struggled with advertising because the price to advertise on the site just didn't make sense to labels, especially once Facebook and YouTube popped up and they could target the exact person they wanted. I don't know, it definitely feels like the model, because of the way the platforms are structured, are broken, and it seems like you have to be in the top 1% of the top 1%, just like Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift on Spotify, to make sense. Even if what you're doing resonates with, like, one of your videos reached 2 million people, and I bet you didn't see a penny for it.
Yeah. Whenever I thought I was like aware of like kind of how ad structures work and you know how ad revenue and like TikTok and like YouTube worked. And then I realized once I started getting views, like, oh, it's like way less than I even realized, you know? The model does just kind of seem broken. I do not know what the answer would be. I don't know, like, it seems like Patreon seems like the most viable direction that I've seen. That it seems like the one place where I'm actually seeing people being able to, like, you know, pay rent.
But the flip side of Patreon is you end up super serving with extra stuff a kind of minority of your followers. Like a lot of musicians have like a few hundred or a few hundred of their fans, and they end up spending more time creating things to keep the value for those people, which makes sense. But like we did a Drown in Sound Patreon years ago, and I got people complaining that they weren't getting anything extra, and I was like, but you're funding to make this entire website and community free online. They're like, yeah, but I'm funding, like, don't I get something else? And I had a couple of odd conversations, because the patronage or the patronage of Patreon didn't quite sit in the same way. Like, for instance, some of our community now funds the forums, but they don't want to be credited because they don't want to they don't want it to seem bad for those that can't afford to contribute. Like, I quite like using Twitch, where people can just like gift subscriptions to other people. That feels like a kind of pay it forward, like a nice model. So you can have a free subscription to a creator's channel because you happen to be online when someone bought like 40 subs. And the creator obviously gets the money from that. And when the cost of living and people's financial situations are so different, even in the same town, let alone around the world, you can see how that's going to really vary. Because like, if you're a creator that's popular in Saudi Arabia, then the economy is completely different, as long as you're appealing to the super rich. But if you're appealing to the poor in one of those countries, you're not necessarily going to get the same levels of support. So yeah, so I think so much of the economics of creating things, but it also then starts to become like, do you want to be Sonic Youth, or are you quite happy being Daniel Johnston? Like, all these things start to kind of shift as well, don't they, of what you create and who you're creating it for.
There is also that idea that, it's another thing I think about in terms of like Patreon, or just kind of how the media landscape is looking, is that like a lot you're speaking to, and like a lot of like what Patreon and those avenues tend to like cultivate is that like sort of like parasociality.
Yeah.
That I find like interesting. Like it feels like the big viable way to, you know, make money as someone, content creator, I guess. I kind of hate that word. Is to cultivate some sort of like parasocial relationship with your audience. You know, which has its caveats, and I have a lot of thoughts on that. But it does kind of mean that a lot of the bands that I loved growing up, that I loved because there was like this sense of mystery. It was like they weren't trying to cultivate like a personal relationship with every single fan. Like, it was like they were purposely trying to be as opaque as possible. And there's a certain appeal to that I think is maybe being lost now, that, you know, every single label is like telling every single artist that like they need to be on TikTok. They need to like constantly be like putting things out, constantly relating to fans on this like personal level. It's like, what's going to happen to that recluse rock star that like just wants everyone to fuck off?
And I think like you posted a video about Phoenix not so long ago, and I don't really know anything about Phoenix, but I adore their music, and I almost like don't really want to know too much about them.
Yeah, no,
like, they seem like
it.
Cool, nice guys. Like, the drummer's amazing. Like, but I don't have any like need to know like what makes them tick. So, from your video about the greatest review of all time, are you still sure that the Jet monkey pissing in its own mouth review is the greatest review of all time?
Yeah, I mean that. See, I'm laughing even now just thinking about it. That is like, I think, one of the greatest things ever put on the internet.
Well, then that's good. That means the audience agreed and didn't change your mind.
Yeah, the fact that so many people told me they knew exactly where I was going with that introduction, like,
yeah,
made me laugh even harder a second time. That like it's like, oh, I've somehow amassed an audience that I could really relate to on that level. I love that.
So at the start, I asked you, what is journalism? To you, what is music journalism? And of the things we've just discussed, is any of that shifted? Because journalism and music journalism, I think, are slightly different things, but I'm just curious whether you've got any fresh thoughts.
Oh, man. That's such a good question. Like, both these are good questions. I feel like I'm disappointed in my answers. I feel like music journalism, yeah, it is like journalism, but I think it is like the things that, you know, give you a deeper understanding, or like maybe a closer relationship with this thing that we love, which is music, you know, whether that's something new or something that you already have a relationship with.
I have a question written down here that's just nostalgia ? Because I didn't really know how to approach the fact that like some of your best performing videos really lean into a kind of shared history. And I wonder to what extent you want to break out of that sometimes. Like, obviously you've only really been doing the channel since about February, haven't you? From what I can see.
Not long at all. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, the nostalgia question mark is like, that could get me going talking for hours. I mean, I guess I'll be inflammatory and say that, like, I kind of hate nostalgia, ironically enough. Like, as a concept, as a thing in the culture, I kind of hate it. Does that make any sense?
It makes sense. There's a brilliant Simon Reynolds book all about that as well.
I had this phrase that, like, I feel like every single time I say it, it's like, it's a jinx and it ends up happening. And I guess I won't name any names necessarily, but it'll be like, man, when nostalgia comes for insert band name here, or like when nostalgia comes for like insert this movie here, nostalgia's dead. It's over. And like every single time it ends up happening. Cause like, I think nostalgia could be great in uplifting things that certainly deserve to be uplifted, but like so oftentimes, sometimes nostalgia comes from things that should have just are better off in the past, you know? And it's kind of a difficult thing. It is like kind of an uncomfortable thing for me where just like, I've made jokes. I always refer to myself as a nostalgia merchant because that's kind of what I am selling. I don't know how I feel about that.
I'm going to end the episode there. I'm going to end you with a self-deprecating question.
Love it. Perfect.
Thank you so much for your time. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think about every 3 minutes of this podcast could probably be another hour long. So,
oh yeah, I can talk for hours. I really, really appreciate it. I'm like super flattered that you even asked. Oh.
What a seriously lovely guy. Like, that conversation took place a little while ago, but I don't think anything in there is particularly out of date. Obviously, some of the chronology and timeline, I've followed him online much longer now, and he's put out lots more videos since we had that conversation. But I think Royce just shares so much warmth, depth, knowledge, wisdom, and above all, he really gets into the idea of lore. And I just love that concept that music needs a much richer kind of world built around it, and not always done by the artist. Sometimes the most amazing stories come from the fans building their own concepts and perceptions around a project. I wrote some other notes. There was a moment where we talked about having like a creator house or like a collective approach to approaching the web around music content. And I think that on the one hand, you could say, oh, that's just what magazines are, bringing together a collection of like-minded individuals. But I think there's something more than that in this need for uniting people and feeling like you're part of a collective or a community, as comes up in most of these episodes. And I think that something needs to be said about how isolated and siloed people are. I once joined something called the Lonely Writers Club, which I think I mentioned in the episode with Yancey, who was the co-founder of Kickstarter, who's now working on Meta Label, and recently launched something called A-Corps, Artist Corps, which I'll probably talk about in another episode. And the Lonely Writers Club was really lovely. It was just a Discord channel with some sub-channels in there with people talking about the writing, people who don't have a sub-editor sharing it to get other people's feedback, thoughts, feelings, suggestions, improving as a writer. There were like drop-in sessions. People could not pitch their ideas, but tell people what they're working on so they could sort of talk through it and think through it with a collective of people, which was really helpful and really nice. And I definitely have felt that sense of being lonely. Like, even when Drown in Sound had a team of people, it was quite fragmented. Like, one of the nicest things about it was we had like a behind the scenes message board just for the staff at one point, and we had like a Yahoo group, which must have been back in like 2001, 2002 or so. And that would now be a Slack, I guess, or a Discord or something like that. And I think that something about remote working, and especially doing a project that's kind of a solo project, definitely needs that. And I think with a lot of artists I speak to as well, like, they really thrive off having a network and community of musicians they can be in touch with and get a sense of whether they're losing their mind or not. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Go look up Royce online. ShoshinBoy. I really hope I've said that right as well. I realise I've said it twice and I haven't actually checked with Royce how to pronounce the word, which I should have done, and I did not. And at the BBC they would have a whole team I could phone to check the pronunciation of words. So this has been the Drown in Sound podcast, and that was an episode about the future of music journalism, which does fit with our theme this season around the future of music. It was just one of those episodes I sat on for a bit longer than I should have done, just like the Ilana one last week, and just like one of the episodes I got coming up next week, unless I record something new in the meantime. And I think that this conversation about the creator economy and journalism and music, it all overlaps. Like, all the challenges facing music, all the challenges facing the media, are all challenges facing every business in a very online world. So I would hope that even if you don't work in music, that was a useful kind of series of things to think through. Definitely go back and listen to some of season 2 if you haven't already. I interviewed John, who started The Quietus. I interviewed Jerry, who edits Prog magazine. I interviewed Emma Garland, who's one of my favourite journalists, talking about kind of intersectional reporting on war zones and gender, and the ways in which music writing could really evolve to be both political and musical related writing. I spoke to people from The Big Issue. I spoke to Greg Cochrane about climate journalism and how he's become a climate journalist and music journalist. Sometimes he's a music journalist that writes about climate, and that was a really inspiring conversation for me. And Greg is great, and we've got to know each other a lot better since that conversation, and I keep seeing him at music and climate related events. So this has been the Drown in Sound podcast. I've been Sean Adams, your host. This has been produced by Josh Craggs, who's cut it all together for me, and you've been you. I'll see you next time. Bye.